Water pressed against glass like a living thing, shimmering in basement windows where children once taped their drawings. A goldfish floated past a teddy bear's face, both trapped in the same silent prison. Above, a woman's scream tore through the quiet street, accusing a neighbor of ruining everything. Yet somewhere on that same block, a German shepherd paced restlessly, sensing a storm that would change more than just the water's course. It would decide who this neighborhood really belonged to. Before we begin, give this video a like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Morning light spilled over the cul-de-sac, too calm for what had been done in the night. The creek that had always sung beneath the willows now lay silent, smothered under a flat sheet of fresh concrete. Thin mist curled from its surface where sprinklers had been left to keep the pour from cracking. Karen stood on the far side, white t-shirt wrinkled, half-cut white hair pulled back in frustration, her voice sharp enough to cut air. She wasn't shouting at the concrete. She was shouting at him, the neighbor holding a phone steady on the still water, capturing what the HO wanted erased. Across the street, the sump pump coughed itself hoarse inside a basement window. A little girl's bicycle leaned against the glass, its paint rippling under the waterline. The smell rose slowly, a strange sweetness, like grass trapped under ice. A father knelt on the driveway, filling a bucket from a hose to fight the water creeping across his floor. 2 doors down, another neighbor argued over where the property line really ended, both men speaking over the sound of rushing water they couldn't see. On the hood of a faded military truck, the retired Army engineer spread a set of hydrology maps. His hands were weathered, the kind that had built more than they had broken. He traced a finger along a line, stopping on a mark hidden in the bends. That, he said, was the bypass, buried, blocked, and forcing the creek's pressure back into every basement like a piston. Around them, voices rose and fell, blame and panic mixing in the summer air. The German shepherd trotted between yards, ears forward, eyes tracking the water's slow invasion. It stopped beside the man with the maps, pressing its head into his side as if it understood what the numbers meant. Someone had buried more than a creek here. Someone had buried the truth. The ground shivered, so faint at first it could have been the wind. Then came the dull rattle, a seam in the slab flexing under unseen force. A thin, glassy sheet of water slid from the crack and began to snake toward the nearest foundation. Children leaned on windows above, staring down at the shimmer. Inside, the fish moved closer to the glass, their movements sharp, restless. No one spoke for a moment, watching that water claim its path. The engineer lifted his eyes toward the sky, reading it the way soldiers read horizons. He didn't need to say it. Everyone already felt it. Something had started beneath their feet, and once it moved, nothing in this neighborhood would stay still. By noon, the air had thickened into a heavy, waiting silence, the kind that makes every sound sharper. Clouds rolled in without warning, dragging shadows over the street. A single drop struck the concrete, darkening it to silver, then another, then hundreds until the surface rippled like it had a pulse. Water began to gather along the edges, creeping toward the basements as if drawn by something it recognized. In the dim glow of a half-submerged basement, children's drawings sagged on the walls, the colors bleeding into strange shapes. A small goldfish drifted past the paper, its tail flicking against the glass like a quiet knock. Above ground, a neighbor rushed from his door, boots slipping on the algae, slicking his steps. The man with the phone grabbed his arm just before he fell, steadying him against the fence. Across the yard, Karen's voice cut through the rain, sharp and relentless, blaming everyone but the ones who had poured the slab. 2 HOA board members stood together under the narrow cover of a porch. Their voices were low, but the words Stormwater Beautification Grant carried in the damp air. They didn't look like men confident in their decisions. They looked like men already calculating what would happen when the truth broke the surface. The retired engineer stepped into the street, holding a laminated photo up to the gray light, a copy of the stream alteration permit. The dates didn't match. The city stamp sat crooked, as if pressed on by a hand that wasn't allowed to touch it. It wasn't just an error. It was a lie. His voice was low but steady when he said the inspector's name was forged. Following the map in his mind, he led the man with the phone toward the old bypass marker. There, half hidden beneath wet leaves and rusted bolts, they found it, a stainless plug jammed into the drain's throat, the metal bright and clean against the decay around it. The marks were fresh, the edges scored where a wrench had gripped too hard. Rainwater pooled at their feet, the current stronger now and patient. Somewhere behind them, the German shepherd barked once, short, urgent, then turned toward the rising water as if it already knew where it was headed. Night settled over the neighborhood like a held breath, the kind that waits for something to snap. Streetlights painted the wet asphalt in long, trembling reflections. Inside the small kitchen of the man with the phone, a laptop screen glowed with emails sent from an address that didn't exist yesterday. The files attached were ugly, spreadsheets with rows labeled basement remediation optics, beside inflated landscaping budgets. In between the numbers was the truth. Water damage wasn't an accident. It was leverage. Someone would profit if insurance payouts came. Outside, footsteps scraped across a driveway. The HOA treasurer stood in the rain, his hood low, eyes darting like a man walking toward his own confession. When confronted, his voice cracked. He admitted trying to stop Karen, but she threatened his sick mother's wheelchair ramp permit, forcing him to sign off on work he knew was wrong. The words fell heavy, soaked in guilt. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder until red lights spilled over the houses. Down the block, a teenager had gone into his basement to pull his gaming PC from the rising water. The floor had turned slick, and his foot slipped. He hit the stairs hard, his head striking the edge. The sound was sickening. Neighbors rushed in, towels pressed to the wound, hands shaking as they tried to stop the bleeding. The sirens closed in until they filled the air. In the street, the engineer leaned over the hood of his truck again, drawing an X on the map in thick black ink. That mark was where the bypass could be opened from street level, the one place where trapped water could find its freedom. But his eyes stayed fixed on the man beside him as he spoke. Once the wheel turned, the force could crack the slab, send debris rushing into the homes downstream. This wasn't just a fix. It was a gamble that could end everything. The German Shepherd padded close, rainwater dripping from its muzzle. It watched the engineer's hand on the map, then looked toward the concrete slab in the distance, ears standing sharp in the wind. Somewhere beneath them, the current pressed harder against the block, searching for the smallest path to break free. The next afternoon, the heavy doors of City Hall swung open, letting in the wet air and the tension that had been building for days. Families shuffled into the chamber, clutching photographs, receipts, and jars of the murky basement water. Karen stood near the front, smoothing the wrinkles from her white shirt, practicing the sharp edges of her outrage in the reflection of a darkened window. The inspector avoided every eye in the room, his hands buried deep in his pockets. The treasurer sat 2 rows back, holding a folded letter like it was the last anchor he had. When the hearing began, the retired engineer was first to step forward. He didn't raise his voice, but each word landed heavy, explaining how the concrete had trapped the creek, how water pressure built until it had nowhere to go but into people's homes. The man with the phone played footage for the council, trucks arriving at dawn, workers moving like shadows, pouring the creek full before most had even woken up. Gasps rippled through the audience when a mother stepped forward with a clear jar. Inside, minnows flicked silver in the pale light, swimming in the same water that had soaked her children's beds. Then a firefighter rose, his uniform still damp from the morning's work. He told them response times had doubled because the flooding turned streets into detours, and the creek that once drained the storm now trapped it. Before the council could respond, the inspector's aide slipped a folded note into the man with the phone's hand. 4 words were scrawled across it. Page 4, forged signature. The weight in the room shifted instantly. Eyes turned toward Karen, who gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles whitening. She stepped toward the microphone, voice already rising, words about restoring order and preserving the community burning through her teeth. But before she could finish, thunder cracked overhead, the kind that rattles old glass, and the council chair's gavel struck hard for recess. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of something breaking before the day was over. The storm siren's low moan rolled over the neighborhood, vibrating in the chest before the first drops even fell. Street drains spun with swirling leaves, their grates straining against the rush. At the end of the cul-de-sac, the engineer's X on the map had become a manhole rimmed in rust, water churning in the grooves. The man with the phone crouched over it, hands gripping the rusted wheel. The engineer stood close, counting down from 10, his voice tight. A black SUV screeched to a stop nearby, and Karen stepped out, rain plastering her hair against her face. Beside her, a private security guard carried a folded letter sealed in plastic, thrusting it forward with a threat of legal action if anyone touched the bypass. The treasurer appeared from between 2 houses, snatching the letter from the guard's hand and tearing it in half before the words could take root. The firefighter backed his truck into position, The pump hose coiled and ready. Lightning flashed, throwing the scene into a momentary still frame, the wheel beneath shaking hands, Karen's rage twisting in the rain, the German Shepherd standing with its paws in the water, eyes locked on a slab in the distance. The wheel groaned as it turned, the metal screaming after years of rust and neglect. Beneath the concrete, the creak answered with a sound like a deep breath after being held too long. Cracks began to race across the slab, jagged lines spreading fast. A basement window, bowed inward from weeks of pressure, shuddered, then released with a sigh as water reversed its pull. From the seam in the concrete, fish shot backward in streaks of silver, following the current into the old channel. The water swelled and hissed, rushing past the edges like it remembered exactly where it belonged. People on the street stared, unsure whether they'd just save their homes or unleash something worse. Then the slab heaved upward, the force lifting it like the lid of a boiling pot. Beneath it, the sealed culvert plate gleamed in the stormlight, Karen's initials scratched into the concrete lip for anyone to see. The rain came harder, blurring faces, but no one missed what that meant. The sirens faded into the softer rhythm of rain tapping on rooftops, the chaos thinning into the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. The treasurer stood in the middle of the street, soaked through, finally letting the truth fall from his mouth. The grant had been designed to reward beautification success metrics, and Karen promised him a share if flooding swayed public opinion for a new levy. It wasn't about water or homes, it was about money and control. Across the street, a city inspector stepped forward, his face pale but set. He admitted the signature on the permit wasn't his. Someone had taken his name, his authority, and used it to bury the creek. The admission cracked the air in a way thunder couldn't. Karen, standing off to the side, stopped shouting. Her eyes moved slowly across the crowd, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Inside their waterlogged houses, families waded through knee-deep currents to reach what could still be saved. A father lifted a dripping box of photo albums to the top of a dresser, pages sticking together but not lost. In the corner, a child clutched a stuffed animal, its fur dark and heavy, refusing to let it go. In one home, the man with the phone bent down to help an elderly woman lift a soaked chest onto her table. When she opened it, the sight of dry, untouched letters inside brought her to tears. She laughed through them, holding his hand for a moment that didn't need words. The German Shepherd moved from doorway to doorway, its paws leaving wet prints, checking every open room as though counting its people. When the dog returned to the man with the phone, it leaned into him, head pressed against his leg, tail still for the first time that day. If you've ever fought to protect your home, drop a heart so these families know they're not alone. Share this story so every buried creek gets a voice, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if your hand was on that rusted wheel? The rain kept falling, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like an enemy. The sirens faded into the softer rhythm of rain tapping on rooftops, the chaos thinning into the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. The treasurer stood in the middle of the street, soaked through, finally letting the truth fall from his mouth. The grant had been designed to reward beautification success metrics, and Karen promised him a share if flooding swayed public opinion for a new levy. It wasn't about water or homes, it was about money and control. Across the street, a city inspector stepped forward, his face pale but set. He admitted the signature on the permit wasn't his. Someone had taken his name, his authority, and used it to bury the creek. The admission cracked the air in a way thunder couldn't. Karen, standing off to the side, stopped shouting. Her eyes moved slowly across the crowd, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Inside their waterlogged houses, families waded through knee-deep currents to reach what could still be saved. A father lifted a dripping box of photo albums to the top of a dresser, pages sticking together but not lost. In the corner, a child clutched a stuffed animal, its fur dark and heavy, refusing to let it go. In one home, the man with the phone bent down to help an elderly woman lift a soaked chest onto her table. When she opened it, the sight of dry, untouched letters inside brought her to tears. She laughed through them, holding his hand for a moment that didn't need words. The German Shepherd moved from doorway to doorway, its paws leaving wet prints, checking every open room as though counting its people. When the dog returned to the man with the phone, it leaned into him, head pressed against his leg, tail still for the first time that day. If you've ever fought to protect your home, drop a heart so these families know they're not alone. Share this story so every buried creek gets a voice, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if your hand was on that rusted wheel? The rain kept falling, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like an enemy.